Now being
and are
recorded.
presenting to you this afternoon on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish and Tsimshian nations this afternoon. Amelia and I are settlers to these lands, with our ancestors having come from England and Eastern Europe to settle on Aotearoa and Turtle Island. We invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territory or homeland on which you live, learn, work, play, and are cared for. So as Sam mentioned, my name is Nicole Spencer. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and hers. As a public health dietitian with Vancouver Coastal Health, I work with school staff and educators, health professionals, and community partners to build capacity for supporting healthy eating for children and youth in Vancouver. Now I'd like to hand it over to my co-presenter this afternoon, Amelia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amelia Maleshkova. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a population health dietitian with Northern Health, and similar to Nicole, I work with partners to promote healthy eating for school-aged children. I am based in Terrace, BC, but my role is regional and encompasses the entire Northern Health region. So that's from Haida Gwaii to Valemount, all the way up to the Yukon border and all the communities in between. So I'd like to start by asking you a few questions, and we're going to be using an online website called menti.com. This will require you to use your computer or phone and go to www.menti.com and enter in the code that you see there, so 924212. So the first question we have is we'd like to know where you're joining us from today. Are you from Vancouver Island, Lower Mainland, the interior, Northern BC, or perhaps you're joining us from somewhere else? And if you can't use Menti or would like to provide a more specific answer, you can certainly use the chat box on the right-hand side. Nicole, I actually can't see the responses, so I wonder if you can speak to that.
Well, that's not helpful, is it? Yes, absolutely. So what it seems like is the bulk of people are joining us from the Lower Mainland this afternoon, followed by Northern BC, Vancouver Island, and then other. And to find out what those are, perhaps people can enter in the chat box. And so far, no one from Interior BC yet. But let's go now to the next question, which just invites you to ask about your role. Amelia, so yeah, feel free to, again, enter it on menti.com or enter it in the chat box if you'd like. And it looks like so far we have the bulk of people are health professionals, followed by community partners, and then patients and caregivers, teacher, and other so far. Interesting. See if that shifts. Be holding. Great. All right. I'll turn it back over to you, Amelia.
Okay, thanks.
Great to know who's joining us. Yeah.
Okay, so the goal for this presentation is to get us thinking about how we talk and approach food with children. We hope that this will help inform the work that you do. We recognize this is a huge topic. We could spend hours. So today is only meant to give you a taste and whet your appetite. So I'll start by covering some theory, and then Nicole will be spending some time sharing some practical tools and resources with you. So before we get started, I'd like you to take a minute to think about this question. What does it mean to be a good eater? What does the term good eater mean to you? You can just reflect or maybe jot down some ideas. And often what comes up when I ask this question to groups is things around food choices. So eating the right types of food or eating your vegetables and that sort of thing. So today I'd like to expand on that and introduce you to the idea of eating competence. Eating competence is not about what we eat, it focuses on how we eat. And this term was coined by a dietitian and social worker, Ellen Satter. And there are 4 components to eating competence. The first is positive eating attitude. So in other words, do you feel good about food and eating? The next is the next is food acceptance. Are you comfortable with, do you enjoy a variety of food, and are you able to learn to like new foods? Internal regulation. Do you listen and respond to your body's cues of hunger, fullness, satiety to decide how much to eat? And finally, food management skills. So do you take the time to plan, prepare, and eat regular meals and snacks, not just grabbing food at the last minute? So children who are good eaters feel good about food and eating. They're able to learn to enjoy new foods, and they intuitively know how much to eat for energy and growth. And so over time, they will also learn to the skills that they need to feed themselves when they leave home, but that food management piece comes much later. So what you'll notice here is there's nothing about a good eater finishing their plate or always eating their veggies. So why should we be talking about eating competence? So there's actually some really good research to say that adults who are eating competent are healthier, they have better diets, they're more joyful with eating, they're more trusting and capable with themselves and other people, they have better self-acceptance, they're more active, they sleep better, they have better lab tests, and they also generally do better with feeding their children. So if we know that eating competence is important, how can we support children in developing and building their eating competence skills? So we can make this happen by applying what we call the division of responsibility in feeding. So this is the best practice approach used by dietitians and other health care professionals across the province. And the division of responsibility outlines the roles for adults and the roles for children around feeding and eating. So feeding is a shared responsibility where adults provide leadership and children have choice within the structure. So the adult is deciding what foods to offer, where to offer, and when to offer. The child decides whether and how much to eat from the foods provided and to grow as nature intended. So the division of responsibility honors and preserves children's ability to respond to hunger and fullness, and it also recognizes that children come in different shapes and sizes, and they all need the same opportunities around food. So to elaborate on this, adults are ideally offering a variety of foods, ensuring that there are at least a few familiar foods on the table, like bread or milk and rice. That way kids are coming trusting that they can fill their tummies while they learn to accept new foods. Children also do best with predictable sit-down meal and snack routines. So not letting children graze in between, except for offering water, will help children have an appetite for meals and snacks. Adults also decide where to offer the food. So that might be at a dinner table, a picnic blanket, or any place where we can gather around food. Ideally, we want to minimize distractions, so turning off your TV, your cell phones, and aiming to provide a pleasant and comfortable eating environment. So it's really important that once adults have done their pieces, their job is done. Then it's up to the child to decide whether to eat and how much to eat from the foods provided. So adults don't have to do or say anything about how much is eaten. That is left completely up to the child. So the division of responsibility in feeding also applies in the school setting. So here it's important that we respect the foods that families provide to their children from home. We never want to take away food from a child because that can lead to feelings of shame and anxiety about the food that they eat or what the caregiver has provided. So if there are concerns, those can be communicated home to parents, but not through the child. So we also want to be very sensitive to the fact that many families do face barriers with accessing healthy foods. So what schools can focus on is deciding what is offered, for example, in a school cafeteria or a school food program, and ensuring kids have enough time to eat and a safe and pleasant eating environment. We know that sometimes kids are, scarfing down their lunch on the way out the door, or they're eating their food in a lineup to save time. And so we recognize that there's a great degree of flexibility in terms of how schools will apply this, and you will only know what works best for your school or classroom. But of course, the part that never changes is that we are always letting kids decide how much and whether to eat and in what order to eat their food. So that was the basics of the division of responsibility in feeding. It sounds like a very simple concept, but once we start applying this, questions do arise. So I see a few of you have already answered the question, which is great. So if you go back to Mentee, take a look at the questions and let us know which of the following statements do you think apply to the division of responsibility in feeding. Right, so it looks like some responses are trickling in. We'll wait a few minutes for all the responses to come in. So it looks like a lot of people, no one's saying that finish your sandwich or eat your veggies aligned. But we're getting lots of responses for everything else. I'm going to give it a few more seconds. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay, so these were the two responses that apply the division of responsibility in feeding. So asking a child to sit down with their lunch, that is within the adult's role to decide where, as well as ensuring a safe and pleasant eating environment. And a lot of you pointed to that as well. So the one about lasagna, is a bit different. So we know that food is deeply personal and it brings us joy. It's tied to our cultures and traditions. So it's only natural that we want to share that joy with others. And I'd like to say that, it all comes down to intent. So if you're trying to get a child to eat a certain food or more food than they normally would on their own, children will pick up on that as pressure. So in fact, shifting our conversation and focus away from food during meal times can actually help children feel more relaxed with eating. At the end of the day, we certainly encourage share your experiences with food as long as the intention isn't to get them to eat. And as well, keeping in mind that modeling and showing kids through our actions that we enjoy a variety of foods and that we feel good about our own eating, that can be just as if not more powerful than anything we can say. Okay, so some of you felt that these statements didn't align, and some of you answered that maybe some of them did. I think most of us have said something along these lines. And so this isn't to make you feel badly in any way. It's just meant for us to reflect on the language that we use. So all of these statements, some of them are more subtle than others, but they're actually all examples of pressure. And we actually want to avoid pressure as much as possible because we know pressure backfires. Pressure can make it harder for children to listen to their bodies. So for example, finish your sandwich before you go outside. It also suggests that some foods are less desirable than others. So eat your veggies before you have your cookie. So here we're telling kids that they have to get over their hurdle food before they get to their good stuff. So, we're sending the message that some foods are better than others. Pressure also makes learning to like new foods harder. So you may get a child to take a bite of kale in the moment. So asking them, just try it, just take one bite. But in the long run, it actually makes it harder for that child to learn to enjoy and eat that food on their own. And some kids are more sensitive to pressure than others. So a really good strategy is saying, you don't have to eat it if you don't want to. And that really can help take off the pressure, or even offering children napkins to politely spit out food if they don't want to swallow it. So the division of responsibility is also called the trust model. And children's eating patterns can feel very erratic. Sometimes that can make it really hard to trust that children will get enough. So it can be reassuring to know that even though intakes vary for children from meal to meal and day to day, they're actually really good at making up for things and compensating over time. So the research has really shown us that when we set up the structure, they will get the amount that they need to grow and be well. And so DOR really is a process. It takes time to establish structure as well as trust on both ends. So if you think back to the beginning of the school year in September, typically, things are a little more chaotic. It takes time for students and for everyone to settle into their roles and routines. The same thing goes for feeding and eating. So if we establish a consistent structure and do our part with feeding, children will know what to expect, and they will become more relaxed at meal times, and they will slowly start to sneak up on new foods at their own pace. So I just wanted to share one of my favorite quotes that we've sort of adapted from Ellen Satter to fit into the school context. And this is, she says, the goal of raising good eaters is to help children grow up with positive eating attitudes and behaviors. It is not to get them to eat their carrots for today's lunch. So what this is really highlighting is that we're really aiming for that long-term view of supporting children with developing lifelong positive eating attitudes and behaviors. It's not about getting children to eat their carrots in that specific moment. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Nicole.
Thank you so much, Amelia. So Amelia has provided us with some context about the evidence-informed approach to support healthy eating in children. And we definitely recognize that every school is different and not everything in this approach can be applied at every school. But what we hope is that there are elements that can be applied at any school. When I was thinking about what opportunities exist, Lord Roberts Elementary came first to my mind, because I know that at their school, one of their prep teachers focuses on edible education for the entire school. He incorporates gardening and hands-on food preparation linked right into their curriculum. The photo on this slide was taken after a pilot project at the school with community partners growing chefs and fresh fruits called Lunch Lab, in which the students cook and serve food for all their student peers. They make everything from chili to tofu chicken adobo. And as you can see from the smiling faces in this drawing, the program was well received by the students. Now, Lunch Lab is an incredible program and requires a huge amount of effort and collaboration. But it's not only that hands-on food program that makes their school a wonderful example of how we can support healthy eating at school. They also nurture eating competence by thinking about their job as adults, providing the when food is offered. The students have lunch recess and free play before they eat lunch, allowing kids to come in ready and hungry to eat, not distracted and wanting to get outside. They also have enough time to eat because they've added in 20 minutes of mindful eating as part of lunch hour, incorporated right into their curricular time. And then when we think about where food is offered, everyone at school sits together at tables, both students and some of the teachers too. So we can't talk about opportunities in schools without reflecting on how we talk about food in general. Whether it's during eating or at other times, how do we talk about food? Does any of this sound familiar? I'm so bad I ate cake last night. Or it could be flipped. I was so good last night, I had salad for dinner. No junk food at school. You can't eat that candy from your lunch. Don't eat that. Sugar is bad for you. And I know we have the best of intentions. We want children to eat well. I think we need to recognize the innumerable spheres of influence that impact our own eating and our children's eating. How can we be kind to ourselves and recognize why it's like this? We are influenced by a multi-trillion-dollar diet and supplement industry that can override our natural desire to feel good about enjoying a variety of foods to bring nourishment and pleasure. We know that many children consume more sugar than is optimal for health, and the reasons are complex. But let's remember one of the pillars of healthy eating, as Amelia referred to earlier, is having positive feelings about food. If we call any food junk or try and restrict it, this can actually lead to kids sneaking it and eating more of it while feeling shameful or guilty about it. So instead of bad or junk or unhealthy, food is food is food. So with that in mind, what are some opportunities when we're talking about food? Here are some opportunities to nurture healthy eating and a healthy relationship with food. How about I had, say, cake with dinner last night. It was yummy. Or I had broccoli with dinner last night. It was yummy. I put lemon on it and I love how tangy it tasted. Nothing is more powerful than children seeing you enjoy your food. But if you're going to say anything at all about your food choices or their food choices, talk about what you enjoyed about it, whatever food it was. There are no good or bad foods. All foods fit. Let's give ourselves and children permission to eat and get curious about how different foods make them feel. And to that last quote, a couple of weeks ago, my eldest daughter came home from school and said, "Mom, does candy give you energy? Teacher at school said we need to eat healthy food at snack because that's what gives us energy." And I was able to say, you know what, there are no unhealthy foods. All foods give us energy. By eating a variety of foods, we get what we need to grow and be active. So I hope that provides some sort of do no harm kind of language that we can use. So if it isn't helpful in the long run to tell a child that sugar is unhealthy, how do we provide the opportunity for children to improve the quality of their food choices? So to identify a variety of ways we can apply that division of responsibility and support eating confidence at school, we have curated content to share that teachers, school staff, community partners, and health professionals have found helpful. So these pages can be found by searching on the web for VCH, Supporting Healthy Eating at School, as well as Northern Health, Healthy Eating at School. And I'd like to share some of the opportunities that can be found in those pages. So thinking about the first two boxes here, introducing food and delivering hands-on food activities. Last year, I applied for a mini food grant and taught the Food Explorers program in my daughter's class. I remember the day we explored fish. We started with a riddle, sort of what am I riddle, and read a book about fishing. Then I introduced that we'd be making fish nuggets today. I had 3 students rush up to me and say with desperation, "I don't like fish, and I hate fish." They were ready for a confrontation. And I said, "Oh, okay, you don't have to eat it." I could see their bodies just immediately relax. After being involved in preparing the recipes, smelling the nuggets cooking on the hot plate, when the opportunity to taste came around, every single student took a nugget. We all sat around together and they ate it all up, including those 3 students. We sent the recipe home with the students, and you know what else? I had several parents share with me that they made the fish nuggets later that week. That link back to family, especially in the early years, is really powerful. Now, it doesn't mean that every student will try every food that's offered, but a positive eating experience doesn't need to involve eating. These experiences build on each other. I think it illustrates the power of embracing curiosity along with hands-on food exploration and the power of sharing food with others. I don't think it would have had the same impact if I'd gotten into a lecture about why fish is good for us and had told those 3 students to just try it. I recognize that hands-on food experiences can be a lot of work. For example, to get volunteers in the classroom to help out and getting funds to deliver it. But it doesn't have to be something like fish nuggets. And apple tasting, which is listed here, is a powerful and simple activity that doesn't require too many supplies. And there are even opportunities to use food from the BC School Fruit and Vegetable Program plus milk for classroom food exploration. So when it comes to involving kids in growing, harvesting, and cooking food, there are links here to information about school gardens on the Healthy Eating at School website. And Spuds and Tubs is a wonderful activity from Ag in the Classroom, which a class is provided with the resources to grow and harvest their own potatoes. And the last link here is to the Healthy Schools grants, and at the bottom of that page, the external grants page, where you can apply for funding for food activities and gardens. It's through one of the external grants that I was able to teach Food Explorers last year. Now, the first box here speaks to ways we can connect kids to where food comes from. Certainly, growing food at school itself is fantastic if you can make it work. The Ag in the Classroom also has this new resource called Grow BC, where students can learn all about where their food grows around the province. And if you have the resources to arrange a field trip to a farm, smokehouse, or garden, that adds additional place-based learning. In the second box here, when we're thinking about offering a variety of foods at school without pressure, I recognize that one of the challenges of the school setting is that when food is entirely provided from home, there's little control of the what at school, and it can be more difficult to provide a variety of choices to students, since it's dependent on families' resources, skills, and choices. So whenever there's opportunity to introduce school meal and snack programs or different fundraising opportunities, it can be really powerful. When it comes to fundraising, it doesn't have to be chocolate or donuts being sold. There's the link there on healthy fundraising, and Fresh to You, which is also listed here, is a great example of a fundraiser that involves using fresh produce to raise funds. When it comes to the third box here in creating a supportive eating environment, we've heard so many success stories about the Play First Lunch. The link listed in the table shares a 2-minute video showing how the Play First Lunch has been successfully implemented at a BC school. I think it's a nice video to share for inspiration. And then thinking back to that Lord Roberts Elementary example, they created enough time to eat by connecting mindful eating to the curriculum. We're so lucky to have powerful cross-curricular opportunities with the inquiry-based BC curriculum here. And lastly, I think it's worth asking what it's like to eat for the students. Do they have a structure to eating where they aren't grazing from their lunchbox all day? Or as Amelia mentioned, eating in a lineup. Are they sitting at tables and are adults eating with them? Both which nurtures their ability to connect over their meal. I respect that teachers and school staff have some of the toughest and most important jobs in the world. You deserve a break, so I recognize it may be a different lens to consider taking that break without having it include eating lunch. But for consideration, the power of your involvement. Which speaks to this next point as well. As we mentioned earlier, at Lord Roberts and with Food Talk at School, role modeling is so powerful. That first link in this top section applies the division of responsibility to the school setting, as we've done this afternoon, with a few key points in messaging about the roles that adults and children can take. So it's a nice sort of one-pager summary. And the second link provides us with some more supportive language that we can use. And lastly, making the connection to how kids link food to their bodies. We didn't get into this topic today, but it's an incredibly important one. I mentioned earlier about the diet culture we're immersed in. In order to support children and youth to have a healthy body image, we've listed here some teaching tools and an excellent teacher workshop designed to provide content in this area. Also on our web pages, we have these 1 to 2 page resources and articles on topics that we hear coming up very frequently in the school setting, and that can be sent home to families. Most of these are written by public health dietitians. And the last one here, New Year's resolution, Kids in the Kitchen, is from Better Together BC, a platform designed to support families to cook and eat together more often. In the pressure cooker busyness many of us are living in when it comes to feeding kids, I think this article provides some tips and is really designed well to inspire. And lastly here, when it comes to resources, the Ellen Satter Institute, which again was where Eating Competence and the Division of Responsibility was founded, it's really a wonderful space to go for tools. And we've linked here 3 short resources that people have found very helpful. Positive Meal Times is a short booklet that provides language and framing about how to eat with young children, but much can still be applied as kids get older. Feeding with Love and Good Sense, 6 through 13 years, is a longer booklet, and the PDF can be purchased from the Ellen Satter Institute for $5. There's also 12 through 18 years and earlier years booklets as well. And lastly, The Joy of Eating is a short article that outlines the foundation of healthy eating using Eating Competence, and that's designed for adults. Jesse's Legacy is a BC organization that provides useful resources for both educators and families and youth around preventing disordered eating. And then lastly here, Dietitians at HealthLink BC is a free BC service where you can connect for personalized guidance from a dietitian. There are also opportunities to pay for private practice dietitian, which can sometimes be covered by extended healthcare plans, so it's worth asking. And I love this quote. A meal is not about food. It's about the interchanges and interactions that go on around food. We do not sit at the table only to eat, but to eat together. The social interaction over a meal is as substantive as the nutrition. Through food, we express love. We bring comfort and hope. We forge new relationships and reinforce old bonds. Food reaffirms not only our humanity, but the joy of being alive. Now, how can we convey this experience at school? There's some key messages from what we've covered. I know it's been a bit of a whirlwind, but we're hoping that the discussion can be a rich opportunity for sharing. What we're hoping you can get out from today are ways that we can support healthy eating and develop eating competence in children at school by providing that positive role modeling. How do we eat and talk about food? Create positive food experiences, regular routine of sit-down eating opportunities with enough time, and adults eating with students, aiming to explore a variety of foods. We've discussed numerous ways to increase children's exposure to different foods. And anytime we can support students to actually develop those food skills themselves, that's really at the heart of it all. What can the students do? If we can focus on these key elements, we're on our way to supporting lifelong healthy eating habits for children. And really, this should maybe come after the discussion, but we do invite you to head back to Menti and just reflect for yourself. And you can continue to do this even during and after the discussion. But we'd just love to learn what's something you would take away after today and share. And again, you can share in the chat box of the webinar if you prefer, and really share this at any time. As we finish up with the discussion, I think we'll have quite a nice amount of time for discussion this afternoon. And yes, thank you so much for taking your time to listen to us. It's sort of a funny thing to have it be so one way, but yeah, again, we're hoping to please ask your questions and comments in the chat box so we can have more of a dialogue right now. But going forward, we really appreciate you taking this time. And if you do have any questions or feedback about the webinar, please reach out. If there's something more specific for your area or needs, we encourage you to reach out to HealthLink BC, as we mentioned earlier, or at your local community health center to find out who your school-related contacts are. And now I will hand it back to Sam to bring forward any questions that have arisen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole and Amelia, for that really thoughtful and important conversation and introduction to that topic. I'm going to hand it over to you all who are sitting in the webinar to ask whether you have any questions or comments. If you do, could you please type them into the chat box on the left-hand side of your screen? And then I will relay those questions to Nicole and Amelia. So I'll give you a minute to do that. And actually, I did have a question, so maybe I can start, which is, I'm wondering how you navigate teachings around food system sustainability, things like the environmental impact of some foods or some ethical implications of certain foods, and how do you navigate those teachings when you're also trying to not be judgmental around food choices? Is there a trick to that, or what does that look like?
Amelia, please feel free to jump in. I think really the most important thing to do is to think about what can people add in and not what we need to cut out. So it's not about telling children that they need to stop eating meat, they need to, that kind of thing. It's really all about developing those food skills. Like if we want people to, eat more, plant-based foods and get basically that's by increasing the variety of foods that they're consuming. And can't really do that with just information. It needs to be something that is developed. So I think it's really just all about framing what foods that we can add in. And I guess I would say I think you can teach about food systems in the context of food systems, but I wouldn't teach them alongside nutrition education, because they're very, very different in terms of what influences food choices and how we can be supportive to inspire change. Amelia, I don't know if you have anything to add.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I would totally agree, especially for younger children. Food really needs to be about exploration, because as we know, they have very little control over what foods they're eating at that point. And we can start to introduce some of those more complex topics as children get older. And I love your point about, if you want to get kids to eat more plant-based proteins, we need to expose kids to these foods. And I have a really great story about that. When I had an intern 2 years ago, we went into a classroom and we did a little workshop on plant-based proteins. And so what we did with that is kids learned, where legumes came from. They grew from, the ground, what like peanuts look like, where they grew. We brought a bag of edamame beans. To some kids, this was totally new. They were so excited to touch them, the fuzzy edamame, and get to eat the fuzzy edamame beans. And we actually had kids, the teachers told us the kids were raving about it for days after. So that's a really great example of how we can support keeping that sustainability piece in mind, but just making it all about exploration.
Great.
I just wanted to add to that one other thing that we didn't have time to talk about it really in this webinar, but there are different sort of age-appropriate nutrition education outcomes that you can look at, and as Amelia mentioned, especially with younger children in terms of exploring food, but as they get older, we can also neutrally teach about classifying foods into different groupings, like proteins and plant-based proteins and things like that, and recognizing ways to add in more variety. It is all centering around adding in variety and getting what we need through a different variety of choices.
Great, thank you. We now have a whole ton of questions coming in,
great.
So lots to talk about. So one of the first questions here from Jen asks, what is available to share on curriculum-based food literacy for teaching the teachers?
Nicole, did you want to take
Go
that
ahead.
one?
Go ahead. I started the last one, so I felt like you should.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, it's a really great question. So if you are, speaking for myself, like if you are in the northern region, I am a really good contact. If you have any questions or need some guidance in terms of how to approach teaching about food for children, there's also BC Dairy Association offers free workshops for teachers as well. So I believe they do in person. I think you have to have a minimum amount of teachers to sign up, but I think they've recently also started doing their online workshops. So you can sign up and it's an hour and they get all the curriculum. And so they do have some really good resources on there. A few of the examples we shared, like the tasting apples, do come from their webpage. And then otherwise, I would encourage you to look at our web pages as well. There's lots of key messages there, as well as lesson plans for teachers. Teaching about food, it can feel really scary sometimes because, it's overwhelming. I don't know everything about nutrition. But when it comes to teaching kids about food, it really should be about having fun and exploring and cooking and doing all these hands-on things. So just something to keep in mind.
Great, thank you, Amelia. Another question we have here from Claudia asks, how can we encourage kids at the schools to try new food in a friendly way? Please provide examples.
Well, I think that my fish nuggets example is pretty good example of that, how we gave them the opportunity to be around the food. And I think it's really important to recognize that when we're providing them with an opportunity, with actual food, and an opportunity where we're sharing and having an opportunity to share food with others, that in itself is so powerful. That experience of seeing your peers enjoying food or preparing food themselves. If we don't put the pressure on or any kind of parameters around what they can or should be trying, they'll be more likely to, maybe not that first time, but maybe the next time, or overall enjoy that food. I think Amelia also mentioned it in context of kale during the presentation. Amelia, I don't know if you have anything to add on to that.
Yeah, I will say that, yeah, I agree with Nicole. And sometimes, there's lots of rich learning in seeing food, touching food, seeing others eat food, learning about, where food comes from. Kids don't necessarily need to actually eat the food for that to be a positive experience that helps them build their comfort. And oftentimes it takes a long time for kids to build up their confidence with trying a new food. So I think the research sometimes says 20 or more times of exposure, of like neutral exposure. So if we're pressuring kids, that makes it harder. So yeah, it doesn't have to always be about getting kids to try the food. There's lots of different ways that we can support learning.
Great, thank you both. And then there's a comment from Jen saying, suggesting to involve them in harvesting and preparation. So as you're saying, lots of ways to engage them.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. I kind of rushed to that table, but certainly anyway, yeah, at any stage of the process, whether it's deciding what to even plant and being in the garden and then harvesting it and cleaning it and deciding what to make and preparing it and then having the opportunity to taste it and cleaning up after that. And every space along that continuum is so rich and powerful. It's not just about what goes in the mouth at that actual time.
Great, thank you. Michelle asks, do you have a suggested book list that they should get for the library?
I think we shared, did I not share the book list? I think that in one of the tables of the slides, let me just go back in there for a moment. I think there was a book list on there. BC Dairy Association dietitians have a book list. I'm just double checking on the slides if I put it on there, because I had intended to. Yes, it's the second on one of the slides where we had those boxes where I was sharing about opportunities for adults to support eating competence. The primary book list is hyperlinked in one of those slides, and we will share the slides after. But if you Google it, primary book list, BC Dairy Association, it may come up.
Perfect. Thanks, Nicole. That's great. A question from a new participant, Larisse, asks, sometimes when I talk about the Ellen Satter division of responsibility, some parents have negative feelings around children wasting food when we give them the ability to choose if and how much they eat. Any thoughts on how you would talk to parents about this?
Do you want me to take it? I know it can be really tough. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, either way, go ahead. No, go ahead, well, I can chime in.
I've just so seen this personally in my own life, as well as with other families. If you want to decrease waste in the long run, it really is so important that they get that opportunity to sort of to navigate the food that's before them. And I think if you allow them to serve themselves, that provides an added element of rich learning. And at first there will be waste, but if you're looking at the big picture, eventually they will learn to be able to serve themselves sort of as much as they feel like they can or want to eat. And if they're not serving themselves, starting off with very small amounts of different foods, or even asking them, do you want this food? Do you like this food from what's offered? Is really, really powerful. So starting small, and then they can always have more, as long as, sometimes food runs out, but if it doesn't, that there could be more that they could have.
I totally agree with everything Nicole said, and I can even provide an example. Oftentimes, the food waste piece is a big barrier for people because they're worried about that. And we did have schools that started their own salad bars, and what they noticed was that at first they would have quite a bit of food waste. And so I was there to encourage them and then tell them, it's a natural part of the process and of learning. And what they found was that over time, it didn't take very, very long, but over the course of a few months, they saw that food waste go down. So yes, there will be food waste, but parents can expect that over time, kids will start to increase the variety of foods that they eat, and so that's how we can support them.
Great, thank you. I think that's a really meaningful question. I see another question here from Claudia, who asks, there are some programs in the US that reward kids with paper gold stars for being brave enough to try new foods. Any thoughts on this?
I don't want to go first. There's actually a resource, I believe it's on both our web pages, around, that's around non-food rewards. If you're rewarding someone for trying a food, that is actually a certain kind of pressure, because you're sharing that you really want them to try that food. And so I think, as Amelia explained, one slide about pressure backfires. If we're taking over their job, if we're sort of saying, hey, you get this if you do this, if you eat this food or try this food, we're not sticking to our jobs and our roles in terms of the division of responsibility. And we know that if we can stick to those roles where we don't interfere with their ability to explore when they're ready, that it has stronger outcomes for them to be enjoying those foods in the long run.
And I would add that, we want kids to learn to actually enjoy foods because they like the way they taste. We know that kids will eat foods that taste good to them and that they're familiar with. So when we provide those external rewards, it actually doesn't really work in the long run. I would use non-food rewards when possible, and that's always tricky. But if we can avoid using food as reward or rewarding for food that's eaten, yes.
Okay, thank you. Backtrack a tiny bit back to the food waste conversation that we were having. Stacy just added a comment here that said she's seen organizations have children weigh their waste collectively, not individual children. So she mentioned that it helps to bring awareness so that children take portions that they think they're going to eat, and over time there's less waste. So actually we have two final questions here before we call it a day. There's a question here from Salah, who asks, how are we encouraging children to buy and eat local and seasonal foods?
Go ahead, Amelia.
I would say everything we just talked about in the beginning, about getting kids to explore foods. If you want them to eat local foods, get them to explore local foods, provide hands-on opportunities for kids to build their comfort and familiarity with local foods. Like Nicole said, if you're able to take kids on a field trip and have the resources do so, that's a wonderful and rich learning opportunity, whether you're visiting a local farm to learn how food is grown there, visiting a local farmer's market, or going to a smokehouse. So those would all be great examples.
And even if you can't go and visit a farm, the Grow BC resource on Egg in the Classroom website now, it's a great resource to show where the different farms are and different kinds of foods that are grown in BC, and you could reading books about certain foods and sharing that, it's grown just right down the street. Then again, it's not about telling them you should or need to do this, because that again comes across as pressure, but it's about exploring and giving them the exposure to the ideas that we want them to have access to, or ask their parents for, or that kind of thing.
There is also really a great lesson plan, I think, on BC Ag for the classroom, and kids think about a pizza and all the ingredients that go into the pizza. So, for example, if it's flour, they kind of work backwards, like where does flour come from? Okay, flour comes from wheat, and they have a little map that they can sort of trace back, like where the local sources of that would be to see how many food miles their food has traveled to get to their plate. So that's always a really good one to do in terms of local food.
Great, thanks for that. I'm sure this all takes practice and many attempts to try and get the messaging across in a safe and appropriate way, I imagine. But I think these are really good examples of how to integrate those learnings into the classroom and into our everyday lives, actually. There's one final question here from Jen, who says, sorry, I just lost the question. How did Lord Roberts get a paid position at their school for a garden and kitchen teacher? That's a more logistical question.
Right, and certainly Brent Mansfield, who holds that role, would be able to answer that more clearly. But my understanding is that it was one of the prep roles, and I mean it's a school of about 600 children, so I think that kind of logistic is certainly probably potentially slightly easier at a larger school where there are enough diversity of roles where more attention can be put to that. But I think again, with the curriculum being so inquiry-based and food and all the elements that go into producing food can link to every area of the curriculum. So perhaps it's not so difficult these days to advocate for there being a prep role that is more linked to that topic.
Yeah, thank you. I would also recommend Farm to School BC is another great resource that's closely connected to the health authorities who work quite closely with you. So if in your region you have a Farm to School hub, definitely I would recommend approaching them as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much, Nicole and Amelia, for all of this really valuable, really meaningful information. Before everybody leaves, I just want to thank you all for spending an hour with us here this afternoon. Did Nicole and Amelia, do you have any final words before we sign off?
I just really appreciate, so appreciate everyone's attention. Yeah, thank you so much. And feel free to still head back onto Menti and let us know if there's something you're pulling out from today, or even anything that you're struggling with, or reach out directly to us, because we really want to gain a better understanding of what people are taking away.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks for both of your time. We'll be hosting our next Farm to School BC webinar on February 19th. The topic is building skills and confidence to make outdoors your classroom. So hopefully I will see a lot of you there, and you can stay tuned through our Farm to School Facebook page and newsletter. Again, thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Amelia. And thanks everyone for being here. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.